When the Legends Die, Chapter 47, Part 2. He felt the rain trickling under him again and the smoke in his eyes, and he reminded himself that he wasn't in the arena or anywhere near it. He was right here in this miserable camp, waiting for the cold rain to let up so he could go looking for that bear again. And the whole thing seemed very stupid. The more he thought about it, the more he felt like a fool. He had lived with everything that bear represented for a long time. He could go on living with it, he decided. As soon as this rain stopped, he would dry his gear, pack up, and get out of here. With that thought, a decision made, he felt more at ease. He built up the fire again, found a dry spot to sit, and dozed in the warmth. When he wakened in mid-afternoon, the rain had begun to slacken. Another hour, it had eased to a drizzle, and the sky had begun to clear. He needed more wood. He picked up his axe and started to leave his shelter, and his eye was caught by the movement down at the stream. He stopped, looked again, saw a doe and two fawns come out of the brush. The doe sniffed the air, swiveled her big ears, curious. She was looking upstream. He carefully laid down the axe and picked up the rifle, got the doe in the sights. She was not 50 yards away. He fired, killed her with one clean shot. The fawns whirled, lunged into the brush, and he took his knife and hurried down the slope to bleed the doe, smiling to himself. He had been hungry for red meat, for venison, and here it was, practically in his frying pan. He bled the doe clean, then butchered out one loin and took it back to his camp, exulting. He chopped dry wood from the dead pine, built up his fire, cut a slice of venison, and set it to cook. He hung his blanket where it would catch some of the fire's heat, hoping to dry it out before he tried to sleep in it. The venison cooked with a tantalizing odor. It had been a long time since he had eaten venison. Finally, it was done enough. He put it on his tin plate, cut another slice, and set it to cook, and began to eat. The first few mouthfuls tasted wonderful. Then the taste began to change. He didn't know why. He put more salt on it, and that helped. He finished the first slice. The second slice was ready, but he left it in the frying pan. Something was bothering him, and he was angry at himself for being bothered. Finally, he exclaimed aloud, "I didn't sing the deer chant either." He said it defiantly, then was silent, abashed, and somehow sorry he had said it. He took the second slice onto his plate, cut into it. It was too done, and he ate it, telling himself that at least he wasn't wasting cooked meat. When he had finished, he looked at the rest of the loin and decided to cook enough of it to last him on the trip out. It wouldn't spoil if it was cooked, not so quickly anyway. So he fed the fire and cooked several panfuls of slices and wrapped them and stowed them with his other supplies. By then, the drizzle had stopped, and the first stars were out in an open patch of sky off to the north. His blanket was still damp, but he rolled up in it and began to sleep, knowing he was going to get out of here in the morning. He had a restless night with bad dreams, mostly about his mother and the old tales, that he refused to remember the next morning. He got up, shivering in the chilly dawn, cooked a breakfast of pancakes and the last of his bacon, closed his pack, and was ready to go. He looked at the venison hanging in the tree, more than half the loin he had taken from the doe, and he took it down and left it on the ground, where the carrion eaters would soon dispose of it. Then he went along the hillside half a mile before he turned and followed the easy trail beside the creek, not even allowing himself to look at the doe's carcass. The brush was dripping, but the air was clear and crisp, as always after a rain. A few degrees lower and it would have been frosty. He thought of frosty mornings at the lodge his father had built, when his mother sang at her work and taught him little songs about the yellow leaves and the hoarding squirrels and the fawns that had lost their spots. Some of the words came back to him now. He could smile at them, remembering, because he was going away from here and probably would never come back. Then he came to a place where he could look off to the southeast and see Horse Mountain shimmering in the clear morning air. And his mind went back to the frosty mornings when he went down the valley from Bald Mountain and the charred ruins of the lodge and met Benny Grayback and the old man called Fish, waiting there at the foot of Horse Mountain to take him back to the school. That was a bitter memory. He put it away from him. He went down to the creek bank again, pushing that memory from him, and came to a place where the creek made a small mud flat. He went around it and started on and turned back. His eyes had seen something that his mind had missed. He went back and looked again. It was a bear track there in the mud flat. It was full of water from the rain, but it was a big track. Then he saw other tracks, all of them full of water. They had been made during the rain yesterday. He looked around, crossed the creek, and in the soggy soil of a game trail he found another track, a track clean enough to show the long triangular sole mark, the round prints of the 5 toes, even the claw marks, all 5 of them. No, only 4 claw marks. It was the mark of a hind foot, identical with the print he had seen on Horse Mountain. He went on up the slope, finding a sign here, another there. A quarter of a mile, and he found a stump that had been ripped apart, and beside it was the mark of a forepaw, the rough half moon of the palm, the round heel print, the round toe marks, and their claw prints. There was no doubt now that this bear was not a cinnamon. No cinnamon bear ever had such paws or such claws. The trail wandered zigzagging back up the mountainside, down through the gullies, doubling back on itself. It wasn't more than 36 hours old. He forgot time until it was mid-afternoon, and he was hungry, and the pack straps were cutting into his shoulders. He went to a nearby rise and took his bearings. Off to the southeast was Horse Mountain. To the northeast was Bald Mountain. He was on the first bench of Granite Peak, and the only sensible thing to do was to find a campsite, spend the night, leave his pack, and pick up the trail again in the morning. Then stay with it till he ran the bear down. He worked his way along the bench until he came to a place where a small creek bubbled across an opening with a thicket of lodge-pole pines at the back and a clear view to the east. The kind of campsite he should have chosen in the first place instead of squatting down there on the West Fork in the rain. He picked a spot close beside the creek and sheltered by the pines. He cut poles and slung his tarp for a roof, quickly laid up stones for a fireplace, gathered wood, and built a fire. He set coffee to cook, opened the packet of cooked venison, and put a slice in the frying pan to warm up. It didn't taste the way it had tasted fresh, but it was meat, food. He ate while his blanket, still damp, steamed in front of the fire. Then he smoothed a place for a bed, rolled up, and slept, dog-tired. The sun wakened him the next morning. He made a quick breakfast, stowing the remaining venison in a small pack, put everything else except his knife and rifle under the tarp, and went back to where he had left the trail yesterday. It was a cold trail, and for the first hour he wondered if he would follow it at all. Then his eyes began to sharpen, and he saw little signs he had missed the day before. A broken bush here, a scuffed patch of gravel there. By afternoon he was able to lay out a line to follow, for the bear had stopped wandering at random and was going somewhere. He forced himself to stop thinking like a man, and began to think the way a bear would think. It hadn't made a big kill since he had been on the trail. It was getting hungry for something more than grubs, squamash, and chipmunks. It would go down into the valley and kill a deer. Go where the deer were, anyway. He laid out a line and followed it, and knew he was right. Going down the long slope, he came to a pine tree with a low branch where the bear had stopped to scratch his back. A few white-tipped hairs were still caught in the rough bark. He would have missed that sign yesterday. Now he saw it, and a little later he found a small aspen that had been bent down and walked along to scratch its belly, breaking the brittle pine branches along one side. Then it was dusk. He made a cold camp, ate some of the meat. He didn't like the taste or the smell of it, but he ate. Then he found a clump of low-hung spruce and crawled in among them and spent the night. The next morning he ate more of the meat and went on. The trail led down across the valley to Los Pinos Creek. Following the bear's trail up the creek, he began to have stomach cramps. Then his head felt light and he began to sweat. He had to stop and rest. Then he started on again. The cramps were worse. He retched and vomited twice, cleaning out his stomach, and felt better. But before he went on, he opened the packet of meat. It had begun to stink. He retched at the smell and threw the meat away. Then he found a serviceberry bush and chewed a few twigs. The taste cleaned out his mouth enough and cleared his nose so he could go on. Half a mile upstream, he found a mud wallow the bear had used the day before. From there, the trail left the stream, and that afternoon it led him to the lower reaches of Bald Mountain. He thought he had lost it there, but just before dark, he found a big pine where the bear had torn off strips of outer bark to get at the Swedish cambrium layer beneath. The tooth marks were still clear, and the scar oozed fresh, resiny sap. He made another cold camp that night, going without food. The next morning, the trail led him onto Bald Mountain's first bench. There, just before midday, he found where the bear had waited beside a deer run. It had made no kill, but it was hungry for red meat. Nearby, he found where it had slept, and there he found fresh scat it had made that morning. He knew he was getting close. Early afternoon, he found where it had made the kill. It had hidden in the brush beside a deer run until 4 deer came along, a big doe, a smaller doe, and 2 last spring fawns. They came to where the bear was waiting. The bear made its rush, struck down the big doe. The whole story was written unmistakably in frantic hoof prints, broken brush, a gout of blood still drying in the dust, in splatters of blood and loose deer hair on leaves and brush where the bear had dragged its kill up the mountainside. He followed the trail, wary now, every sense alert. It was only a few hours old. Less than 100 yards up the mountainside, he came to an opening among the trees and saw the cache. The bear had eaten its fill, then crudely hidden the rest of the carcass under a heap of scratched up dirt and leaves. Cautiously, he made his way around the edge of the clearing, feeling every step, making no sound. The bear was sleeping not far away, gorged. When it had slept off its first big meal, it would return and eat again. Halfway around the clearing was a tumble heap of huge boulders that had lodged there in some ancient slide. Moving like a shadow, he searched among them, making sure the bear wasn't there. Then he chose a hiding place among the rocks, settled down to wait. The cache was in clear sight, not 30 yards from the rock. His rifle would be deadly at that range.